Hey, everybody. The show will start in just a second, but first, I wanted to update you on the progress of our giving goal. As a reminder, we're a nonprofit organization, and we really rely heavily on our donors. And that's why we've got a goal to reach 100 monthly supporters by the end of June, which is very, very soon. Thank you so much to those of you who have already responded. We've really been overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, and we're now up to 91 people. That means if we can get 8 more people to sign up, then we will meet our goal. Would you consider giving $5 a month, $10 a month, $20 or more? It really, really makes a difference. So if you like what we're doing, please consider partnering with us. You can head over to QuakerPodcast.com, click support, and sign up. Thank you so much for considering it. Here's the show.
This real estate agent actually helped Ruth determine what the exact land values were for those properties. So on the Monopoly, the Atlantic City version of the Monopoly, those are the land values back then. She also did some research in the records of the City Hall, but it was tied to that Quaker principle of the fair price, the single price. And it was also easier for children to play.
Thee Quaker
Podcast.
Story, spirit, sound.
I'm Georgia Sparling.
And I'm Jon Watts.
Welcome back, John.
Thank you.
So Hannah assumed the co-host seat for our Kenya episodes, but now you're back. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. It's good to be back. It was wonderful to know that you and Hannah were holding down the fort with those Kenya episodes while I was on the road filming for the pilot of our video project, which we're launching next spring. More on that soon, but yeah, it's good to be back.
And thank you again to Hannah for recording while she was in Kenya and sitting in for those episodes.
Absolutely.
But now today we have a totally different episode from our past few. We are actually delving into the history of Monopoly.
Right. Monopoly, the board game, of course, with, Boardwalk and Park Place, Marvin Gardens, Community Chest, Pass and Go with your thimble. It's an iconic game which a lot of us played as kids, and it actually has an unexpected history in which Quakers played a role. Georgia, you've done a lot of research for this episode. Do you want to fill us in? Are the rumors true? Did Quakers invent Monopoly?
Well, not exactly. It's definitely the game it is today, though, because of a group of Quakers in Atlantic City, New Jersey.
Right. That explains some of the street names. I'm sure you'll get into that in the episode.
I certainly will. But first, you're our resident board game enthusiast. So what's your experience with Monopoly?
Yeah, well, I've sort of graduated from games like Monopoly, so it's been a little while. But last night I did pull out a board to refresh my memory and played a quick round of Monopoly with my wife Jess and my mother-in-law Anne.
2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. Chance. Oh, I'll take a chance. Yeah. So go to jail. Go directly to jail. Do not.
So I'd put Monopoly into sort of like a family game category. It doesn't take a ton of strategy, and the dice are really the primary engine of moving the game forward. But like all games, it's fun to move your piece around the board and grow your resources and try to win. I'd say that Monopoly is unique in that it's just so blatantly capitalist. Monopoly money is the closest to the real thing of any game I've played. And the primary mechanic of the game, which is, paying other players rent until you go bankrupt, is just like brutally honest, right? I mean, just the name of the game, Monopoly, is kind of odd because, building a monopoly is illegal and unethical, and it is also the goal of this game.
Yeah, and there's an interesting story behind that. The game actually isn't all about gaining wealth, or at least it wasn't originally. It was more a condemnation of these ruthless big business robber baron types. And, there's a lot of layers to Monopoly's origin story, and that made this a super fun episode to research. We've got twists and turns, we've got deception, and of course, we have the Quakers. Plus, we've got a little bonus story at the end sparked by my research into Quaker games. But yeah, let's get started with Monopoly, shall we?
All right, let's hear it.
So, Monopoly is about gaining property and wealth. But is the game as simple as that? We originally got the idea for this episode from our friend and Quaker historian Max Carter. So I called him to find out more about the origins of Monopoly and to learn how friends became associated with the game.
What was that game that became Monopoly? Well, you have to go back to Lizzie McGee, who lived in the late 1800s into the mid-1900s. Lizzie McGee was a progressive economist, woman, inventor, suffragist, feminist, and she was a disciple of the progressive economist Henry George. Henry George came up with a different kind of tax plan in the late 1800s that he thought was much more fair than the income tax. His single tax was a form of taxation on land valuation.
Let's say you owned a piece of farmland that 50 years ago was in the middle of nowhere. But now the city has encroached with all the amenities that come with it. Schools, paved roads, electricity, and what was once inexpensive farmland is now, through no fault of your own, worth 50 times what it was when it was simply a rural plot of land.
So why shouldn't the taxation value of such land go to the community rather than all the benefit go to the landowner, who has little responsibility for the increase in value? So that was his basic theory. And that became very popular among many progressives and among many Quakers because of their various Quaker testimonies of equality and simplicity and all that stuff.
Several communities formed based on Henry George's single tax theory, including a Quaker settlement in Fairhope, Alabama, and a Quaker-adjacent community in Arden, Delaware, to which Lizzie McGee had ties.
Well, Lizzie McGee, not a Quaker, but a disciple of this economic principle, in the early 1900s developed a game to illustrate these principles called the landlord's game. And it was played in order to show the terrible impact of monopolies on the economy. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the whole landlord's game that she had patented displayed that.
The games board looks much like modern-day Monopoly, but the tiles are definitely more pointedly political. There's a go-to-jail space owned by a Lord Blueblood, and there are spaces dedicated to the absolute necessities: bread, shelter, coal, and clothing. Each comes with a $5 tax. In her patent, filed in 1903, Lizzie states, "The object of the game is to obtain as much wealth or money as possible, and that player becomes the winner." Lizzie McGee had grown up during America's Gilded Age, which saw the rise of industrialists like John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, and Jay Gould, all of whom were known not only for their wealth, but also their ruthless and unethical business practices. The landlord's game was a direct response to the wealth inequality that Lizzie saw in American society. The game was meant to be didactic, and there were actually two ways to play it. One was the monopolist rules, basically every player for herself. And then there were the anti-monopolist rules, where every player benefited when another gained wealth. In true American fashion, the monopolist rules won out. And although Lizzie had patented the game, it began to be copied and adapted by people across the country who would localize it to their regions and cities. Eventually, a version of the game made its way to Atlantic City via Ruth Hoskins, a Quaker teacher who came east to work at the Atlantic City Friends School. At this point, the whole country is in the midst of the Great Depression.
As the Quakers there at the Atlantic Friends School during the Depression got hold of this game, said, we can't afford to go to the movies, we can't afford entertainment, let's play this game.
They adapted the game to fit their Quaker values.
The landlord's game had an auctioning element to it. You put properties on at auction. That was counter to Quaker practice. Early Quaker business people pioneered the single price system, that we know what this product is worth, we know what a fair price would be, and that's what we'll charge rather than haggling with people. And auctioning is a form of haggling.
As Max says, that actually made the game less complicated and easier for kids to play. The Atlantic City Quakers also adapted the game to their city. The board that Ruth Hoskins had brought with her featured landmarks from Indianapolis, Indiana, but those names got changed to streets and neighborhoods in Atlantic City. A lot of them you'll probably recognize if you grew up playing a standard U.S. version of Monopoly. And that has a lot to do with Cyril Harvey's family.
My father's name was Cyril, just like mine. I was named for him, Cyril Harvey. And my mother's name was Ruth Thorpe Harvey.
Cyril is a retired geologist and Guilford College professor, and Max put us in touch. Cyril is a friend in his mid-70s, and his mother Ruth basically designed the now famous Monopoly board, which, of course, was based on the layout of Lizzie McGee's original game. And yes, if you're keeping count, this is the second Ruth in our story.
The original board was painted by my mother, and there were 2 or 3 other Quakers at the Friends School who were involved in this process.
With the help of a friend who was a real estate agent, Ruth actually pulled the tax records at City Hall to determine the land values of the properties, railroads, and utilities in Atlantic City. And then Ruth painted the board on a piece of oilcloth, including spaces for the boardwalk, Park Place, and Marvin Gardens. And was your mother artistic? Like, did she draw a lot?
I wouldn't say she drew a lot, but she was artistic. I remember when I was about 5, we took a car trip to California, if you can believe that. And she, I remember very distinctly that she had with her a box of pastel chalk, and she used to stop and draw landscapes.
While Ruth Harvey's original Monopoly board is lost to time, the Parker Brothers version still bears hints of the family's life.
We didn't have much money. So what we did is during the off season, we'd move to a fairly nice house, which we could get lower rents in. And then when the season came for the tourists, we'd have to move to a cheaper house. A lot of those actual streets that are on the board today were the itinerary of this poor Quaker family moving back and forth summer and winter.
Ruth also left her mark on the playing pieces.
She had a thimble that she took out of her sewing kit and various other things that were just old model cars and things. But all the symbols were things that she found just lying around the house, and she picked them up and used them.
The board made the rounds among Atlantic City friends, and that's how a certain man named Charles Darrow got a hold of the game, claimed it as his own, and basically obliterated the work of the women who created it. That's after the break. As you've heard on this podcast, Quakerism has a wide variety of expressions around the world. And this August, Quakers from nearly 100 yearly meetings in all their diversity will meet together for the World Plenary Meeting organized by the Friends World Committee for Consultation. It's the first event like this in almost a decade. It's also the first ever hybrid World Plenary. So although on-site spots are fully booked, you are invited to join the gathering virtually. The cost is $130 or pay as led. If you can't afford anything, you can take part online for free. The deadline to book your spot is June 30th. Please be prepared to submit a letter of recommendation from a Quaker meeting clerk. The Friends World Committee for Consultation connects the 400,000 Quakers around the world through a variety of events and programs. Find out more and sign up for the World Plenary at fwcc.world. Welcome back. So Lizzie McGee's Landlord's Game had gained something of a following, resonating with Americans across the country, including a group of Quakers in Atlantic City. Then enter Charles Darrow, an unemployed, self-proclaimed practical engineer from Pennsylvania. During a trip to visit a Quaker friend in Atlantic City, he plays the board game, which from what I can tell was called Monopoly by then and not the Landlord's Game. Charles Darrow borrows the board, and the next thing you know, he's claiming it's his own invention and selling it to Parker Brothers. He does change it marginally, but mostly just adds in inaccuracies. Here's Max.
One of the pieces of evidence that the game had actually been purloined from the folk who were playing it in Atlantic City was two misspellings on the board. Remember, there are four railroads. One is the short line. There is no short line in New Jersey. There is a shore line. And Charles Darrow had misspelled it or misunderstood and put that one in his board game that he sold to Parker Brothers. The other was Marvin Gardens, Marvin. Well, it was actually in the Atlantic City board game, portmanteau of Margate City and Vintner City, and the neighborhood that straddled those two outliers from Atlantic City was Marvin Gardens, Ven.
The board also hints at the city's racial disparities, says Max.
Ruth Harvey also put in a subtle statement about racism, because what are the lowest priced properties? The ones through the African American community, Baltic Avenue, Mediterranean Avenue, because she knew that. One of the people they had hired to help in their house, a maid, lived on Baltic Avenue, an African American woman. So she was making a statement that most people aren't aware of.
It's unlikely Charles Darrow or Parker Brothers had a clue about that either. And one more piece of evidence. There's a photo of the Harvey family at a dinner party where the game is clearly being played. It's dated a full 3 years before Parker Brothers printed Charles Darrow's version. But if Parker Brothers knew any of this, they didn't care, and they published the game in 1935. It was a hit. The box even came with a little write-up detailing Charles Darrow's rags to riches story that led him to the creation of the game. Of course, it was pure fiction. What the Parker Brothers game lacked was mention of its true creator, Lizzie McGee, and the contributions of Ruth Harvey and the Quakers who created the Atlantic City board.
Where Quakers had a monopoly on the hotels. I mean, there's the old joke, Quakers came to America to do good and did well. The Quakers, had several of these luxury hotels there.
I can't help but note how ironic it is that a game created to denounce capitalism and promote the single tax system ended up being called Monopoly and featuring the streets of Atlantic City, the gambling capital of the East Coast. Back to Charles Darrow. In selling this game to Parker Brothers, he makes a killing on the royalties and never publicly acknowledges his deceit. Ruth Harvey and her family get nothing. Lizzie McGee gets next to nothing. When Lizzie finds out about the game, she contacts Parker Brothers and the press. An article published in Washington, D.C.'s The Evening Star reports that Lizzie sold her patent to Parker Brothers for a mere $500 with no royalties. The article reads, if one counts lawyers, printers, and patent office fees used up in developing it, the game has cost her more than she made from it. Yet, according to the article, Lizzie remained hopeful that this iteration of her original game would introduce thousands to the single tax idea. Unfortunately, that is not how things played out. Despite selling a second game to Parker Brothers, Lizzie did not have another hit, and she died relatively unknown at the age of 81. As for the Harveys, Cyril says he only learned of the family's Monopoly connection through his older sister Dorothy, who was 8 years his senior and who remembered the family often playing the game on their mother's oilcloth board.
I never saw the game in our house, but my cousins lived next door. I used to go over there and play on their board.
Although he can't remember ever seeing his mother's version of the game, he knows he must have at some point. Cyril recalls looking at his cousin's manufactured board and registering that one of the illustrations was different from the one in the back of his mind. What happened to Ruth's oilcloth board is unknown, and why Cyril's parents didn't mention the game to him is a mystery. Even so, they left their Quaker mark, whether or not most players ever know Monopoly's origin story. And if Monopoly isn't Quaker enough for you, after this short musical interlude, I'm going to tell you about an intensely Quaker game.
Every morning, every evening, ain't we got fun, huh? Not much money, oh, but honey, ain't we got fun, huh? The rent's unpaid, dear. We haven't a bus, not a nickel, but smiles were made, dear, for people like us, yes.
Okay, so Monopoly wasn't really a Quaker game, though it had Quaker influences. So I went in search of games that were created by friends, and I found one from the UK that I just had to learn more about.
So my name's Sally Nichols. I am a member of Liverpool Meeting in the northwest of the UK. I've been a Quaker all my life, and I'm here today because I wrote a game called Unable, Unwilling, along with my husband, Tom.
That's right. The game is called Unable, Unwilling. I just want to tell you up front that this game is sold out, but I think it's really worth hearing about anyway.
It's a kind of satire of Quaker nominations procedure and the kind of chaos that is Quaker bureaucracy. So Quakers in the UK are all unprogrammed friends. We don't have any ministers at all. Most meetings don't have any paid positions, certainly in the UK. And the impression I'm getting is that it's also the same in America. Quakers are very good at saying yes to things and very bad at laying things down, which means that meetings get more and more kind of unwieldy and complicated. And everyone's like, oh, we can't possibly not have a representative to this committee. It's really important, even though there's only 4 of us left in our meeting.
Sally has had personal experience with the unwieldy and sometimes absurd nature of the Quaker committee nominating process.
I was a member of a meeting that very nearly appointed an assistant plant waterer. I was a member of another meeting that had a notice board committee, like not even a notice board individual. There was an entire committee whose job was to keep on top of, you know, the fairly small notice board in our meeting. And it's just kind of sucking up more and more energy that increasingly small and elderly meetings didn't have.
And out of this came the idea for Unable, Unwilling, a card game that centers on a fictional meeting called Little Snoring. Here's the blurb on the packaging.
Little Snoring Quakers are in trouble. You can tell this is a UK game. Membership has declined so far that you, the players, are all that are left. Unfortunately, Little Snoring still has over 40 nominated positions and they all need to be filled by tea time. Can you persuade your friends to nominate someone else, or will you be the first to collapse from overwork, resign your membership, and write an angry letter to the friend? The Friend is the UK Quaker magazine, and the idea is that you have a hand of cards, and you have jobs, and you're trying to nominate other friends to jobs, and then you also have excuses, and they're quite comic ones. So there are kind of general excuses that are things like, you know, have you considered the worthy friend to my left? Or, you know, I'm afraid I'm just too busy at the moment. And then there are kind of specific ones that go with specific jobs. So I think actually I quite like war was one of them. It's very tongue in cheek. It's not taking it too seriously, but it's also kind of trying to say, look, this is ridiculous. This is, you know, and this is a real problem in a lot of meetings.
Although the game is meant to be lighthearted, there are winners and losers.
Bigger jobs have higher point scores than others. And if you get to 50, you combine total of 15 points. So if your job gets to the top of the list and you're appointed, that then sits in front of you as part of your kind of Quaker job portfolio. And if your point score gets to 15, then you collapse from overwork, resign your membership, and write an angry letter to the friend. And then the idea is it's sort of the last person standing who is the nominal winner, but they're then the only person left in their meeting, and have 40 nominated posts that they have to fill by themselves. So it's a sort of hollow victory.
Originally, Sally had planned to handprint one version of the game and give it to Oliver as his going-away present. But her husband Tom insisted that they design it properly. Then Oliver took it a step further.
He got wildly enthusiastic about the whole thing and said, we should sell this. And they printed 300 copies and we sold them at Britain Yearly Meeting.
Unfortunately, as I mentioned, Unable, Unwilling is sold out, though Sally said if interest really kicked up, they might be willing to do a reprint. But there are other Quaker-created games out there. Jessica Metheringham, who actually married Oliver, runs a board game company called Descent Games. According to Sally, the games have a Quaker ethos, including one called Disarm the Base, in which people break into a military site to try and disarm it. But maybe the market is ready for an infusion of Quaker games. Perhaps a yearly meeting themed choose-your-own-adventure style game, or a role-playing game where notable Quakers of old face off, peaceably of course. Fox versus Fell, Naylor versus Nixon, Bonnie Raitt versus Bayard Rustin. The possibilities are endless. Thank you for listening, and thank you to our guests, Max Carter, Cyril Harvey, and Sally Nichols. If you'd like to learn more about Monopoly's history, there is lots to dive into. Check out Mary Pylon's book, The Monopolist, which really does a deep dive into this topic. We've also got resources on our website if you want to learn more, including an NPR podcast that I got a lot out of. Head to QuakerPodcast.com for links to those resources and Cyril Harvey's family posed with his mother's oilcloth board. This episode was written, recorded, and produced by me, Georgia Sparling. Jon Watts co-hosted this episode and also wrote and performed the original music. We also had some additional jazz music in this episode, and we'll list that in our show notes. Studio D mixed the episode, and your moment of Quaker Zen was read by Grace Gonklevsky. The Quaker Podcast is a part of Thee Quaker Project, a Quaker media organization whose focus is on lifting up voices of spiritual courage and giving Quakers a platform in 21st century media. If you want to partner with us, please consider becoming a monthly supporter. Every contribution expands our capacity to tell Quaker stories in a fresh way, and it makes this project more sustainable. Visit QuakerPodcast.com for more information. And now for your moment of Quaker Zen.
Philip Gully, 2024. We are a community, a collection of people who believe if you create a rich and meaningful and compassionate community, then those who participate in that community will soak up those values, will marinate in those values, and will become who we ought to be through osmosis, through the gradual assimilation of the highest ideals we can imagine. Quakerism is not a religion of the head, it's a religion of the heart.
Sign up for daily or weekly Quaker wisdom to accompany you on your spiritual path. Just go to dailyquaker.com. That's dailyquaker.com.